Okay, thank you for tuning in to this Tuesday, June the 9th, Organic News here on Awake Radio. And we have a really great, knowledgeable guest live with us right now, Wayne Madsen of the Wayne Madsen Report. And I have an abbreviated Wayne Madsen biography that I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs of, because it's even the abbreviated one is pretty extensive. Wayne Madsen, a Washington, D.C. based investigative journalist, author, and columnist. He has written for The Village Voice, Progressive Counterpunch, Online Journal, CorpWatch, Multinational Monitor, News Insider, In These Times, and The American Conservative. His columns have appeared in the Miami Herald, Houston Chronicle, Philadelphia Inquirer, Columbus Dispatch, Sacramento Bee, and Atlanta Journal-Constitution, among others. Madsen is the author of the Handbook of Personal Data Protection, an acclaimed reference book on the international data protection law, Genocide and Covert Operations in Africa, 1993 to 99. Co-author of America's Nightmare, the Presidency of George Bush II. Author of Jaded Tasks, Big Oil, Black Ops, and Brass Plates, Overthrow a Fascist Regime on $15 a Day, The Manufacturing of a President, the CIA's insertion of Barack H. Obama Jr. into the White House, L'Affaire Petraeus, and the National Security Agency Surveillance, Reflections, and Revelations. Madsen has been a regular contributor on RT and Press TV. He's been a frequent political and national security commentator on Fox News and has also appeared on ABC, NBC, CBS, PBS, CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, and MSNBC. Madsen has taken on Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity on their television shows. He's been invited to testify as a witness before the U.S. House of Representatives, the UN Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, and a terrorism investigation judicial inquiry of the French government. So I'm just going to read the last paragraph. Madsen has some 35 years experience in security issues. As a U.S. naval officer, he managed one of the first computer security programs for the U.S. Navy, subsequently worked for the National Security Agency, Naval Data Automation Command, Department of State, RCA Corporation, and Computer Science Corporation. Madsen was a senior fellow for the Electronic Privacy Information Center and a privacy public advocacy organization, and you're also a member of the National Press Club. Phew. So thank you for joining us on Organic News on Awake Radio, Wayne Madsen.
Hi, good to be with you.
Yeah, you're a wealth of knowledge that I have this, hopefully, the next 57 and a half, 3.5 minutes to get all your knowledge out there to the people that really need it. So the first thing we can talk about is last Tuesday morning was the press conference in D.C. on declassifying the 28 pages, and you also attended that press conference. And what was your take on that and what transpired?
Well, this has been sort of a long-going attempt by bipartisan members of the House of Representatives to declassify these 28 pages in the congressional report on the failures of 9/11. The chief author of that report was the then Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Bob Graham, the former Florida governor and senator from Florida, and he was actually present at the news conference urging that these 28 pages be released. We now know, based on what Senator Graham had to say, that it was George W. Bush who initially refused to declassify these 28 pages, and of course that has been supported by Obama as president. And The press conference brought together not only Senator Graham, but also presidential candidate Rand Paul, who basically has signed up in support of this declassification effort, along with Senators Ron Wyden of Oregon, Democratic Senator, and Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York. And they're joined by members of the House, and they're Republican Congressman Walter Jones of North Carolina, Republican Congressman Thomas Massey of Kentucky, and Democratic Congressman Stephen Lynch of Massachusetts. What I found interesting is during his remarks, Rand Paul said that even the Saudi government favors declassification of the 28 pages, which came as some news to me. And I asked Senator Paul during the questions period who in the Saudi government favors the declassification, because I said, certainly the present King Salman, who was the governor of Riyadh province before and after 9/11, was reported to me anyway by Saudi sources to have been a facilitator of Al-Qaeda members who came through Riyadh, and Salman arranged for them to get large sums of cash, airplane tickets, hotel accommodations, and other support on their way to Pakistan and Afghanistan. So, I asked him, I said, well, certainly, could you tell me if anyone in King Salman's government now favors the release? And he said, well, he read it somewhere last year and he would have to find the actual quote. After the news conference, of course, I met Senator Graham before, and I had a personal conversation with him. And I said, Senator Graham, I've written a book about not only the Saudi involvement in 9/11, but the Israeli involvement in 9/11, working together to pull this attack off. And I handed him a copy of the book. It was a private conversation, yet this conversation and the fact that I had given him the book wound up in a Bloomberg news piece the very next day by somebody who was obviously eavesdropping on our conversation.
Wow.
Which I don't find to be very ethical journalism. I mean, if I had said, Senator Graham, I'll see you for golf next week in Sarasota, how is that as newsworthy as the subject at hand about the 28 pages being declassified? But the very next day, the day after the Bloomberg article ran, then Bloomberg reported that the Saudis and the Israelis have been having secret talks on how to attack Iran. And of course, they both are supporting this ISIL terrorist group, the Islamic State, which is not only aimed at the Shia-dominated government of Iraq, but also against the government of President Assad of Syria, who's an Iranian ally, and ultimately ISIL, or the Islamic State, is going to target Iran. So Bloomberg, the very next day, after trying to basically lambaste me for writing a book saying that the Saudis and Israelis were in cahoots on 9/11, then reported that the Saudis and the Israelis are in cahoots in supporting groups like ISIL. So if they're supporting terrorism today, how could they not have been supporting the forerunner of ISIL, which was Al-Qaeda, back in 2000 and 2001? It's not very logical what Bloomberg News did there, but of course, Bloomberg himself is a neocon, and I don't expect any sort of truthful news reporting out of Bloomberg.
Exactly. And so again, like, they have these 28 pages classified when Bob Graham, who read them, said that they don't need to be classified.
Absolutely. Not only did he read them, he was like the final person who authorized the report to be written. So he not only read them, but his authorship is on those 28 pages along with the rest of the report. Now, I've spoken to people who have read the report, the 28 pages, and basically it implicates the Saudi government. Bandar Bush, who was Prince Bandar, the friend of the Bush family, who was Saudi ambassador to the United States at the time. We have to remember that Bush 41 was in Washington the morning of 9/11, meeting with the Carlyle group, and among the people he met with was a cousin of Osama bin Laden, who was on the board of the Carlyle group. And then he flew out that morning. Bush flew out that morning, and of course, after 9/11, although no one else could fly, members of the bin Laden family were all flown out of the United States to France and Switzerland. So what I know from people who have read the 28 pages, that it absolutely implicates Saudi Arabia, but it's not just the text. There are footnotes and references in those 28 pages, and if they're looked at closely, I've been told that it's like peeling back an onion. It's, reading those footnotes closely, one can come to the conclusion that the Saudis had help. And of course, I maintain that the help they got was from Israel.
And it also implicates the U.S.
Well, of course, because nothing like that could have happened without, as I mentioned, the Bush family was totally implicated in the 9/11, stand downs. And Cheney, of course, we know from the transcripts that he had ordered the Pentagon to stand down on the plane that was flying towards Washington.
Right.
That was ultimately said to have hit the Pentagon. But I believe that this charade of hiding the truth is going to falter soon, because now yesterday apparently Donald Rumsfeld came out and criticized Bush for overthrowing Saddam Hussein in the invasion. So there are cracks now appearing in that neocon, what has been a neocon wall of silence on 9/11 and the invasion of Iraq. And I liken Rumsfeld now trying to say that he was opposed to it and he thought Bush was wrong. By default, he's saying that Cheney, his very good friend, was wrong, because it was really Cheney's idea to attack Iraq and occupy it to get access to the oil. So I liken it to when all the Nazis were in the docket in Nuremberg at the War Crimes Tribunal. Several of them tried to cut their own deals with the Allies, saying, "Well, it wasn't my idea. It was Goebbels. It was Hitler, and one of those was Hermann Goering." So I liken basically what Rumsfeld's doing now to what Hermann Goering tried to do with the Allies to basically avoid the death sentence. Of course, he wound up killing himself because a U.S. Army soldier slipped him a cyanide pill.
What took Rumsfeld so long to criticize Obama on Saddam?
Sometimes I think these guys, when they get old, they start to feel their impending mortality, and I think sometimes they want to clear themselves or get the guilty consciousness off themselves. I don't know. Sometimes it's for religious reasons. I don't think any of these neocons are necessarily very religious, but it may be for his long-term legacy as well. I don't know. I can't psychoanalyze these people, but I've seen it before where, Robert McNamara did the same thing. He was Secretary of Defense under Kennedy and Johnson, and, he towards the end, he expressed a lot of regret for what, happened in Vietnam, for example. So, I think they're trying to clean the slate.
Boy, too bad they don't do that during life.
Well, no, I mean, of course, this is, these people are obviously showing remorse if they do believe in any sort of
Right.
judgment. Like I say, I don't know how religious Rumsfeld is, but I'm sure that's, he just wants, he's probably looking at his legacy.
And so, say the 28 pages get declassified and released. What would that do?
It's not going to do anything. For the people who believe there was much more to 9/11, that the 9/11 Commission, basically provided a whitewash on what occurred that day. I don't think it's going to provide any, instant answers. But as I said, when you start reading the 28 pages and examining the reference material that it points to, I think it's going to open up a whole new line of inquiry for the researchers to then pursue, and eventually they're going to be able to get to the detailed information that will allow those of us who always question the official story to basically be vindicated.
Right. So I would say now could be a good time to move to the panel that you were a part of at the Left Forum. I think it was not last weekend, but the weekend before that.
Yeah.
And the room was like 90 degrees and overflowing. In that, they definitely didn't give you a big enough room. The panel was called ISIS, Made in the USA, the rise of radical Islam. Is the rise of radical Islam a failure of U.S. policy, or precisely what the hidden hand of U.S. policy wants? And it was also paneled by Webster Tarpley, Ray McGovern, and I guess this guy's name is VOX.
Yeah.
Vox. And I mean, we can talk a little bit about, there was some conflict or debates going on between the Vox guy that was...
Well, the session chair, the guy went by the name of Vox, goes by the name of Vox. His name is actually Harry Stuckey. We can have a legitimate debate in public about, what happened, with 9/11, and I certainly have come out and said that I believe Israel was involved in it, and it was considered very newsworthy by Bloomberg. But what I don't think is really necessary in public discourse is to engage in gratuitous comments, and certainly the session chair at one point in time, I think he showed there was a picture of Netanyahu on the screen, and he stated that, and now we come to the evil Jews, and this is Manhattan after all, and there were many older people, elderly people, Jewish people in the room who they said, and I agreed with them, you can say Israel, you can say Zionist, but please don't lump us all together in this gratuitous anti-Semitic remark. And I basically, the very next morning on my way to Washington, I wrote a piece for my website to just disassociate myself from his comments. I think all the panelists were very uncomfortable,
Right.
And then with the sort of the back and forth that occurred after that. But I mean, I don't know what the intentions were, but certainly I don't think that kind of talk is necessary in public discourse on what I think is a very important issue, and that is how the U.S. has been basically manipulated into supporting not only the Israeli but the Saudi cause in the Middle East, and many people don't think that those countries are allied, but they have been for a number of years.
I have one thing came up, and I just was curious, with all of the talk of the relationships between, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United States. I mean, none of that has anything to do with like Palestine and Gaza. I mean, like Saudi Arabia is not in any way involved in what Israel is doing to the Palestinians.
Well, it's funny because the Saudis have always been said that they support the people of Gaza, the Palestinians, and the Palestinians in the West Bank. But what we see over and over again is that the Saudis are very jaded in their support for the Palestinians. can throw money at the Palestinians, but when it comes to actually giving them real support, they've always hesitated to do that. And I think that a lot of it is jealousy, because when you look at the most educated people in the Arab world, you've got the Saudis who go to the best schools and have all the money, but they're not very educated. But the most educated people in the Middle East are by far the Palestinians, and I think there's always been resentment by the Saudis and the Qataris and the Kuwaitis of the success of the Palestinians. Palestinians have gone to work in those countries and have been very successful in business, yet they've caused a lot, they've engendered a lot of resentment because of their success. And probably the only other Arab country that claimed any sort of excellence in being educated and skill sets were the Iraqis. And of course, they've been relegated to this constant civil war. So, and the Saudis certainly were very much behind us going after Saddam Hussein.
And do you see this Israel attack on the Palestinians ever coming to an end?
No, because the present government in Israel has every intention of annexing, and they're doing it, piecemeal, one olive grove, one grazing area at a time, but they're eventually going to annex the West Bank. And they're going to have to give the Palestinians full citizenship, which means that there's going to almost be a slight majority of Arabs to Jews, and if they don't, then they're going to be very much like apartheid South Africa, and they should be sanctioned to the nth degree. They should be suspended from international organizations, because we have no place in this world for apartheid racist regimes. Eventually, Israeli government, if they do annex the West Bank, they're going to be overwhelmed by the Arab population bomb, and the Jewish state will die. There will be a country there with a very large Jewish minority, but eventually it'll become like post-apartheid South Africa. It'll become a democratic state, and I doubt they'll keep the name Israel. I think they will revert back to Palestine as it was known before World War II, when there were Palestinian Arabs and there were Palestinian Jews.
And do you ever see Israel ever being held accountable for crimes against humanity or war crimes?
Well, like South Africa after the apartheid regime, they had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Now, some very egregious Afrikaners and other supporters of the apartheid regime, some of them very few were prosecuted, but most of them were given a pass. And I think the same thing would happen. There'd be some sort of Truth and Reconciliation Commission in a Republic of Palestine. I think the big issue would be to alleviate this nation of its at least 400 nuclear weapons, just like the South Africans had to give up their nuclear weapons. I think we'd see an international move to try to secure those Israeli nukes. This isn't going to happen overnight. I'm looking like 30 years down the pike, long after I'm out of the picture. But I think this is inevitable, that in 30 years there will be no Israel in the United Nations. There'll be a country called Palestine, because the Israelis set this in motion with their annexation of the West Bank. In other words, they are providing the seeds of the destruction of the state of Israel.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, everything has a line that once you cross it, it just comes back to do you in.
Right. And the issue then will be the illegal settlers on the West Bank. Obviously, in a democratic Palestine, they're not going to have any special favors. there will be no special favors for any religious group, and I think many of them will then migrate back to Eastern Europe and North America and the other countries from whence they came.
And so, how exactly was ISIS made in the USA?
Well, we have to look back at, some people on the panel did take it back to the Mujahideen fighting the Soviets in Afghanistan. That gave rise to Al Qaeda, and certainly Al Qaeda has given rise to ISIL because we now know from a declassified Defense Intelligence Agency report that originated in Iraq, probably at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, that the U.S., the West, which includes Israel, and the Gulf states, which includes Saudi Arabia, basically saw the Salafists, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Al Qaeda in Iraq as the key to overthrowing Bashar Assad in Syria, and basically stated that the West, the Gulf states, should support this Salafist move, and it was the only way to get rid of Assad. So there we have the proof that the U.S. Was involved in setting this organization up and nurturing it. Of course, John Brennan, the CIA director, he's very much a Saudi-phile. There's even a former FBI agent who claims that Brennan converted from, he went to Fordham. He's a Jesuit-trained Catholic Irish, but the former FBI agent claims he converted to Islam back when he was the CIA station chief in Riyadh. And he wouldn't be the only CIA member who converted to Islam, because now we know that the former head of the CIA's Counterterrorism Center was Italian and converted to Islam, and the former CIA station chief in Algiers, who actually is serving a prison term for sexual harassment, which I think may be trumped up, he also converted to Islam. So that's not unusual that Brennan may have also done so. Brennan, I believe, should be under much more scrutiny, and I believe he is one of the godfathers of ISIL. I think he has blood of innocent Americans on his hands and others. Yeah. I believe if you're going to set up innocent Arabs in FBI stings and say they're going to, try to blow this up or that up, I think we have definite proof that Brennan has aided and abetted terrorism. I like to see him arrested and indicted as soon as possible.
Exactly. I mean, him along with Dick Cheney and Rumsfeld.
Dick Cheney and Rumsfeld are out of power, but Brennan is right now, and he's been in Israel holding secret meetings, probably to support ISIL. He's been several times in Saudi Arabia. He's been in Turkey, another promoter of the Islamic State, and he's been throughout Western Europe. He's been in Germany. He's been in Britain recently. Somebody needs to either. Well, we're never going to do it. I think hopefully when he's in some foreign country, somebody will place him under arrest as an aider and abetter of terrorism.
Because it's getting ridiculous. I wanted to talk also about you gave this really good. There's a video of you talking about surveillance and journalism, and how journalism is completely dying in this country. Journalists are basically like the criminal. How Obama has used the Patriot Act more than and that's been said several times, that Obama has used the Patriot Act, or is it the Espionage Act
of 1917, passed by Woodrow Wilson, enacted by Wilson during World War I, to basically go after anyone who advocated neutrality. Remember, Germany in World War I was not Nazi Germany. It was a imperialist power, but it was no more imperialist than Britain, who we supported. So, Wilson enacted that, and actually used it to put Eugene Debs, the Socialist Party presidential candidate in prison, and threatened to put former President Theodore Roosevelt in prison under the same law. So this is a very arcane law that should not be on the books, but Obama has used it to go after leakers to journalists more than any previous president combined.
Right. So again, like there's a couple of, you mentioned Eisenhower and his warning of the military industrial complex, and that like what that has to do with what's going on today with, you know, ISIS, ISIL, and what is the whole point of keeping all of these wars and the wars that create the terrorists.
Yeah, well,
Well,
I
like,
mean,
yeah,
it's you know, after Al Qaeda, we had ISIL or the Islamic State. I mean, we always have to have some enemies out there,
yeah,
and it's you know, it's time. You know, it's time that, and we look at all these Republican candidates, by the way, and even Rand Paul is changing his tune from his previous sort of isolationist foreign policy. He's changing his tune now because he wants to get some of that Sheldon Adelson money, I guess. Um, you know, this country cannot afford any longer to be this world power where we can fight three simultaneous wars on three different continents. It's absolutely outrageous that we have this forward military policy. And now we're you know, moving our weapons and troops right up to the Russian border, and we're threatening China in its own waters. And it's quite clear that these maniacs, and I include Barack Obama among them, although I think he's a very detached president, I think he's easily led. And the reason he, at the G7 conference, he basically started to threaten Putin was because John Kerry had a bicycle accident and is out of commission. So that's very convenient for some people that Kerry is in the hospital in Boston and wasn't there to help moderate Obama's stance, because right now Obama's key advisors over at the G7, of course, they met in Bavaria, in the area that was favored by Adolf Hitler as a retreat. I don't think the symbolism should be lost on anybody. But Obama was basically had Ben Rhodes, the neocon deputy national security advisor, advising him, and Tony Blinken, who had been the deputy national security advisor to Joe Biden, who was filling in for Kerry, who's now the deputy secretary of state. So, of course, with Victoria Nuland, the assistant secretary of state for European affairs, she was the godmother of the coup in Ukraine that overthrew a democratically elected president, which is why Russia reacted so negatively to that U.S. Staged coup d'etat, which was only intended to kick Russia out of its naval base in Crimea. They fixed that situation by basically re-annexing or retroceding Crimea back to its mother country. Crimea was part of Russia until Nikita Khrushchev gave it as a gift to Ukraine in 1954. Of course, the neocons, this is all inconvenient history for them. They would like the news media not to dwell on it or look at it. But basically, Russia is the aggrieved party with what happened in Ukraine, not the neo-Nazi Zionist regime that operates in Kiev today.
So with that, I'm going to go to this point that you made in this video talk that you gave, and I thought it was amazing what you said. It was about FEMA, but it ties into what you were just saying, because you're basically like just talking about the powers in general and how they spend so much time living and responding in the unreality that when a real crisis happens, the BP, Deepwater Horizon, Katrina, and I added in Hurricane Sandy, that they're completely unresponsive because they're so used to just living in the sort of manufactured Because yeah, you called Obama the manufactured president.
Yeah. Well, I mean, FEMA, yeah, they're supposed to react to natural disasters, and they failed miserably with Katrina. They failed miserably with Deepwater Horizon, and Sandy. And it's not the first time. This agency, FEMA, is basically it's an arm of the U.S. intelligence and community in the Pentagon, and they don't get involved in these major disaster recovery operations. They provided substandard trailers to people who lost their homes in Katrina. They had mold. People got sick. Deepwater Horizon, they basically were shilling for the British Petroleum and the other companies involved in the very corrupt state of Louisiana, which did not take proper action to save their fishing industry and their other marine-related industries, and people have gotten sick. People have died. The Gulf is basically a dead zone. So why do we need FEMA if they don't do what they're supposed to do?
Exactly. You also said there's a war against reality and the truth.
Yeah, well, that's the news media mostly responsible for that. I held an event last week in D.C. It was the 10th anniversary of my website. We had two panels, one on how the alternate medias had to carry the load on many stories for the mainstream. I mean, 9 years ago, I broke the Dennis Hastert story about his molesting kids on the wrestling team at Yorkville High in Illinois. And it got no attention. Wonquette, for example, which was run by this Anna Marie Cox, who's now with The Guardian, that publication, although she said she had resigned from it, I said, how do you resign from your own vanity site, well, that site at the time stated that I made it all up against Hastert. Actually, Gawker is still claiming that I made it up 9 years ago, even though we know that Hastert's been indicted on these charges, right? Stemming from his payoffs to at least one person for covering up what happened when he was a wrestling coach. So these media organizations are not real news media, or they're not real journalism.
Right.
It's not real journalism. Many of these are associated with the Democrats, the Republicans, neocon operations, George Soros, and they're not interested in the news. They're interested in the spin. And so that was the one panel we discussed that, and the other one was on how the term conspiracy theorist is used as a pejorative weapon to go after independent journalists who are investigating lines of inquiry and stories that the mainstream media refuses to look at. And conspiracy theorist as a weapon was developed by the CIA in the 1960s, just as Jim Garrison was launching his investigation in New Orleans of the real murderers of JFK. The CIA came out and said, look, the way you go after these people who want to debunk the Warren Commission report is you call them conspiracy theorists. And the CIA and its allies and the media have been using that weapon ever since.
Well, that explains, why they don't know how to respond in reality, because they're so used to spinning. And I use the term genetic modification. Like, they're so used to genetically modifying everything that when, reality, they don't know how to respond.
Right. I mean, it's like when you go overseas and you go to a country where there's no genetically modified food. You're amazed about how good the food is. I mean, it tastes better. It actually has some flavor. So, it's the same thing with news reporting. You're getting this homogenized fake news, and then when you go to a country with or you go to the internet. I mean, legitimate internet, not the kooky websites out there. When you're exposed to real journalism, you're not used to it.
That's why, I'm trying to do my part with this show, and I called it Organic News just for that reason. So it's 2 years in April that I've been doing it, and before that, I actually used to help Danny Schechter with his radio show on the Progressive Radio Network.
Yes, where he's a great. We'll miss him. He was a great voice. I knew Danny, and we actually. I remember. I remember one of the news conferences, the 9/11 Commission, and Tom Kane was there, and Lee Hamilton was there, and I asked the question because a week before the FBI said that they had looked at this issue with the stock puts on American and United Airlines, and whether there was some people that knew 9/11 was going to happen and decided to make some money on those two airline stocks. And the FBI said they looked at it and found there was no substance to it. And I asked Kane, I said, "What about the commission? Do you agree with the FBI conclusion that there was nothing there with the stock puts?" And he said, "No, we still think it's on the table, and we're going to look at it." And Lee Hamilton jumped him and said, he said, "I reject the premise of your question." And at that point in time, Danny Schechter, stood up and says, "Wait a minute, it's not an issue of a question; it's a fact, and you can't." That's back in a time when there were very few of us willing to actually call attention to the fact that the 9/11, what they had been, they didn't come out with a report then, but we knew where they were heading, certainly with a whitewash, and we were, very few of us were prepared to accept it. Danny was one of them.
Good for him, and good for you too. So we have 15 or so minutes left. I wanted to bring up Michael Hastings, who was like a journalist that was actually going after real stories, and look what happened to him.
Yeah, and he had expressed some fear of his safety to friends. His car apparently, they said it hit a tree, but it looks like it blew up. The engine was tossed, the Mercedes, away from the vehicle. This was in Beverly Hills, where you don't expect things like that to happen. But I've dealt with a lot of journalists, not personally, but I've looked at the incidents that where they met their demise. I believe this country has systematically taken out journalists who were getting too close to the truth. The first case I looked at was Danny Casolaro, was a stringer for a lot of magazines. They said he slashed his wrists back in I believe it was 1990 or 91, in a motel room in West Virginia, where he had gone up to talk to a source about basically everything from the Iran-Contra case to CIA involvement in drug smuggling and all kinds of things. And basically what Gary Webb was looking at. Of course, Gary Webb, we're told that he shot himself twice in the head, and it's suicide. And then we have Michael Hastings, and certainly there are others out there. Phil Marshall, who was written 3 books, or wrote 2 books on 9/11, another book on Iran-Contra, and was working on yet a 3rd book about 9/11. They said he killed his 2 kids, a dog, and shot himself. He had been he was a retired pilot for United Airlines and Eastern Airlines, and I went out to California to investigate that, and I don't believe there's any way what the police said happened that way. I think he was murdered. So, but and then you look overseas, and murdering journalists is quite a common occurrence. State-sponsored murder of journalists, and I don't think this country is any exception. Although the powers that run this country don't want it known that the government and their sympathizers have murdered journalists, so they try to suppress this information. And again, then anyone who questions the official story is accused of being a conspiracy theorist. But as I mentioned, that term and that concept was started by the CIA to debunk those who questioned the Kennedy assassination, at least the official story.
And is it all basically like so the powers that be are not embarrassed? I mean,
yeah, that's part of it, but I don't think what these people do, though. I don't think embarrassment is even on the. I think they're worried about being caught.
yeah,
I mean, they don't have the sort of. They don't have the sort of character to be embarrassed, because I think these people, they're basically they think they're above it all. They don't have any
right.
conscience when it comes to these things. So I think it's basically, it's like Hastert. You know, Hastert 9 years ago probably, you know, I'm sure he read what I wrote about him at New Yorkville, but he figured, hey, it's some guy writing on some obscure blog. Jeb Bush was asked about how, when I linked Hastert to Congressman Foley from Florida, and Jeb Bush knew about Foley a year before and did nothing about it. He was asked at a news conference in Tallahassee when he was governor about the report on Hastert and Foley and how he knew about it and covered it up. And he just basically dismissed my report, even though I was mentioned by name. He dismissed it. So I think right now, as I reported today, Jeb's running for president. He's going to announce in Miami on June 15th, and he's got this. He's totally embroiled in this Hastert cover-up because he knew about the Foley case, which Hastert had been covering up for a year on molesting underage male pages in the House of Representatives, and certainly Jeb Bush did nothing about Foley, who was a congressman from Florida. So Jeb will be running, and he's already made comments about family values, about unwed mothers, and what he thinks about that. But I think Jeb is going to have a pederasty problem on his hands here. I think he has it right now.
Yeah, if Jeb Bush runs and you know gets elected, I mean that's it. I mean him or Hillary.
Well, yeah.
I'm going to be looking to move out of the country. But just for the last couple of minutes, I wanted to bring up, you know, like the history, you know, in this country, mainly Operation Northwoods, of engaging in terrorist events conducted by the Pentagon in order to blame Cuba and justify retaliation, you know, and also the Gulf of Tonkin and things like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, these false flag goes back to Sun Tzu, you know, the Chinese military strategist. The idea of a false flag isn't a conspiracy theory; it's a historical fact.
That's what I'm right. Like that's what it comes down to is, you know what you were just talking about again, like facts. You wrote this piece, and it's true, and this guy is just you know dismissing it. Like, I mean, like exactly, like it's a war against reality,
right,
and truth.
And you know, I mean, it gets to the point where there are legitimate false flags, and then there are some that I think people have a tendency to overreact, like this Jade Helm.
Yeah.
I believe Jade Helm. You know, obviously it's happening. It's taking place in the Southwest, but I think the reason for it is, and this is where certain individuals don't want to hear the truth. The Southwest is running out of water. Lake Mead is going down to the lowest levels it's been since it's been there, since the Hoover Dam was built. And there's too many people in Las Vegas and Arizona that are using that water, and they're running out of water. We are soon going to have water refugees. And I think the military, and probably in concert with FEMA, I think they're staging this exercise to deal with the inevitable, that there will be mass migrations of people. And this isn't long term. I think this is short term. They're going to have to deal with moving people out of Phoenix, out of Vegas, out of Tucson, out of Scottsdale. And I think that's what the Jade, and all indications from what I've heard from people from out in the Southwest, are that that's the real reason. Of course, those who think that it's Obama going to invade these states, they also don't believe in climate change. Well, they can't have their cake and eat it too.
Right.
You know, either they believe it and they now see an absolute operation on dealing with water refugees. I mean, the people who are the most apt to disregard climate change will be the first complaining about when their tap water runs out, and then they'll say, "What's the government going to do for me?" And then these military convoys are going to pick them up, move them out. So
I wonder where they're going to move them to. New York?
I don't know. They'll have to move them somewhere. But I mean, this is the wealthy will be able to go, but most of the people live in these states don't have the means to just pick up and go. We're talking huge migration, and it's all because nobody's really prepared for this. And I think this military exercise it's too little and too late. But I think that's why it's taking place.
Well, at least they're dealing in reality.
It is reality. The reality is the Southwest is running out of water. Just like the people who say Florida it's not sinking. You go down to Miami and just during high tide, the streets are inundated with water. Yet the governor of Florida, Rick Scott, has forbid anyone in state government from even mentioning the term climate change. These people are idiots. And I'm sorry, but the Republicans and many conservatives basically have their heads in the sand. And there's going to be a lot more sand around for them to bury their heads into soon.
How long? Yeah,
real fast.
How long do they think they can get away with denying reality?
Well, they think some of these people think that the Earth is 6,000 years old. Also, so never mind the fact that scientists just discovered dinosaur blood and collagen 75 million years old, which again, puts to rest the idea that the Earth is 6,000 years old. My problem with scientists finding blood with usable DNA is we may have a Jurassic Park soon, but we'll see what Disney and Universal Studios and all does with this type of find.
Well, thank you so much, Wayne Madsen at the WayneMadsenReport.com. That's your website, and you can find all the information and articles that you write.
Okay.
And
good with you.
Is there anything you want to say before you go?
People need to know that when they watch the mainstream 24/7 news or channels, they're getting a very filtered view on what goes on in the world. So I would urge people to go to legitimate alternate news sites to get their news.
Yeah, right here.
And that's just not me. There's many others like mine out there, Consortium News, the list goes on and on.
Thank you so much, Wayne Madsen. Have a great night.
You too. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.